Good morning. How are you guys doing on a lovely but a little chilly Monday morning in Memphis? Don't know if you guys are here, but if you are, hopefully you're enjoying the chill in the air. I love it. Um, so hope you had a terrific Halloween, although it was obviously a little bit unusual. Um, we had spent most of Saturday constructing a PVC pipe chute for our household. Our neighborhood is a big Halloween neighborhood, and though there was maybe less than half as many people as usual coming around, we still had quite a bit of people, including a trespasser late at night who took the remaining bags of Skittles and M&Ms, which was very disconcerting. But I wish I had, pulled a Jacques on them and come out, and protected my right to exclude a little more strenuously than I did. My kids are particularly disappointed because they were counting on those leftover Skittles and M&Ms. So hopefully you guys had Halloween. Any good costumes? Anything of note from section 12? Nobody dressed up.
Did you dress up?
I did not dress up this year. I skipped, so it was all, everything was a little bit down. I did pull on my Darth Vader mask for small periods of time, but no full dressed up. Sadie was I don't know if you've ever watched the show Once Upon a Time, but if you have, Sadie was Mary Margaret, and Ben was Percy Jackson, not from Once Upon a Time, from Percy Jackson.
So I saw that someone from I think section 11 dressed up as you.
Really?
Yeah, they had they had like their property book with them and a bundle of sticks.
All right.
Like 6 or 7 watches on. It was pretty funny.
6 or 7 watches on. What's that?
Yep.
From the watch
Right
problem,
here.
man. Come on.
Oh, the watch problem. Oh, that's great. That is terrific. But I don't have glasses. Oh well, close enough. That's really good. Were there any other faculty costumes? That's always a fun part of the 1L skits in the spring. Because then you realize all the tics and terrible things that you do over and over and over again, that people that have to sit and watch you for hours and hours on end notice that you don't ever notice about yourself. It's kind of sad. So no costumes from section 12.
I just didn't take pictures.
I don't know. I went for a classic Frodo, as I am apt to do.
Okay. Actually, I don't think I can pull it off today because I'm just not in the Halloween, not as much into it. But for my Friday class, my upper level class, I did. Let's see. I did have my pirate costume ready to roll. But it was very distracting. Are y'all getting that? Are you getting the shimmer off of the gold from the light? Yeah, it kept distracting me the whole class, but we survived. Okay, so what are we going to do today? We are going to talk about future interests. So let me pull up the trustee chart, and we are going to walk through this. As best we can. Okay, so here's the old chart, right? So this one we should know pretty well. A few of you have asked, and I've been a little bit resistant to making all the slides available, especially since a lot of these slides we're doing kind of, they're kind of coming up as we do them, and I'm editing editing along the way, but there are some as I go through them that I think will be useful to provide. And so I'll take a look today and on Wednesday and make some of those available just up on the Twin page for y'all to have, like this one. And some of the examples that are like examples that we walk through, and that I anticipated walking through. Okay, so this is what we got. So we know we've got our present interest. There's 5 of them. Leave out the other one, which is leases. And we're going to say that these are our 5 present possessory interests that you have, that you can enter the property on. Then we have our future interests. And so now we are going to focus in on, in particular, remainders as a future interest that has a lot of different flavors. I just want to note that we're not going to spend any more time really talking about this column. The future interests that are kept by the grantor are pretty straightforward. They come into it once you see where they come from and when they exist. They're pretty straightforward. They don't have different types. They are just kept by the remainder. So a possibility of reverter, the right of entry, and the reversion are all things that we're kind of know what we need to know about them. Okay, so we're kind of done with those. But these future interests that are given to third-party grantees, when I do my 2A for life, then to B, a remainder, or when I give a 2A so long as X and after X, then to B, right? Then it creates an executory interest. These are situations where the sticks have been distributed out to someone else. Those future interests are subject, there's 2 issues with them. One, they're subject to special rules because they cannot last forever if they're uncertain, which we've kind of alluded to, but we'll talk about in more detail. And second, in particular with the remainder, the executory interest, this is true too, but not as importantly. In particular with the remainder, there's lots of different types. So we've been focusing in on 2A for life, then to B, just a straight regular old remainder. And I've started to tiptoe us into this idea that there is a such thing as a vested remainder that's different from a contingent remainder, which we encountered in some of the problems from the worksheet. And so the topic for today is to go through the different flavors of remainder and see how we can go about identifying them. Before we go into too much detail though, I want to reiterate that though we are going to not be talking about this in the context of trusts, almost all of the time in which you're going to encounter this kind of complex future interests is almost always going to be buried within a trust. So rarely is it going to have the same kind of harsh results that we're going to talk about today, where an interest is forfeited if it's not, if it doesn't vest in a certain amount of time or something along those lines. So we will talk about it as though it's not in a trust, and you can sort of see that that's how it grew up, that's how it came to be. But know that in real life, it is going to be in a trust. Okay, so I'm going to give us the whole chart, and then we're going to walk through. And I want to focus first on this top line, because it is the line that is going to guide us in terms of the distinctions between the 4 types of remainders. So the reason I've highlighted this is because there's like that this next chart goes into this chart, okay? So it is all crammed into this one space. So keep in mind that we are only dealing with situations that begin with a life estate, okay? So if you have anything other than a life estate, then you are not going to need to worry too much about all of these different types of remainders. So if it doesn't start with a 2A for life, or there isn't a life estate built into the conveyance somewhere, then you don't have to worry with this. So we are only in this one little box. But once we get into that box, then it gets a little bit complicated. Okay, and the things we need to keep in mind. So here are the types, right? The 4 types of remainders. And the things we need to keep in mind are, do we know who holds it? Is it someone that we can point to and say, you are the one that holds it? Or is it not someone? We don't know for sure even who this person is. So for example, if something says to A for life, then to the first of A's children to graduate from law school, well, we don't know who the first of A's children to graduate from law school is. And so that makes it a little more complicated than if I say to A for life, then to B. I can point at B and say, you are the one who holds this future interest. The next category is to answer the question of when, if ever, does it become possessory? Is it something that happens automatically? Like, is it ready now? Like the 3 vested remainders are, they are ready to be taken as soon as the life estate ends? Or does something else have to happen first before it becomes possessory? So again, using the example of someone graduating law school, to A for life, then to B, if B graduates law school. Well, until B graduates law school, it's not ready to become possessory. Okay, so as long as that gray space is there, then B's interest is not vested, right? That's how we can distinguish that particular one. Then another question that we're going to ask ourselves is, can it be forfeited? In other words, is there something that might happen that will make it go away, this remainder or this future interest? And so this one's a little harder to describe without examples. And so as we get especially into the vested remainder subject to divestment one, that's the one that is distinct from the other 3 on this particular question, in that the answer is yes. So you'll notice that who holds it, identifying ascertainable or not ascertainable people. When does it become possessory? Does it do so automatically, or does something have to happen before it can become possessory? And then forfeited, only one of the 4 can be forfeited, although 2 others might, there might be some complication to it. Okay, so again, this is hard to do without examples, so I'm going to use these examples to walk us through the remainder of the chart. And I want y'all to throw up the blue hands if you need to, and stop me as I'm talking through this. And then we're going to go with examples after that. Okay? Sound like a plan? All right. So indefeasibly vested remainder, on your answers in your exam, you can just put IVR, but put IVR, don't just put remainder, because if you just put remainder, I don't know which of these 4 you're talking about. So an indefeasibly vested remainder is like most of the remainders that we have been talking about thus far. Okay, so this is the sort of best kind of remainder, the most certain kind of remainder. And I'm just going to sort of break out the words, right? Remainder obviously is a future interest that follows a life estate that is held by a third party. So that's something we already know. Vested means it's ready to become possessory right now. Okay, so that's this part. It is ready to become possessory right now, so it's vested. And how vested is it? It's indefeasibly vested. Okay, that means ain't nothing gonna happen to it. That stick has been created, and that stick is ready to become possessory, and that stick cannot be forfeited, and we know who holds that stick, etc. Now, the stick can be sold, it can be given away, it can pass through in a will, all the normal things that can happen with a stick, but the stick exists and it is not going to change, right? It might change hands, but it's not going to change its character, its nature. It is indefeasibly vested. There ain't nothing happening to it. So this is our regular old 2A for life, then to B. And the vast majority of the time, that's what we're dealing with, okay, in real life. 2A for life, then to B. There is a life estate, and then there is a remainder that goes to someone else, and we've identified it, and it's indefeasibly vested, and we're good to go, okay? Easiest kind. We know who has it. It's an ascertainable person. B, It happens automatically upon the expiration of the prior life estate. Nothing has to change, right? B will take it when A dies. And it cannot be forfeited. Okay, it is there, it is created, it is as close to tangible as can be. Okay, so an indefeasibly vested remainder. All right, so then we have two other types of remainders, and they're similar but distinct from one another. The first one is the vested remainder subject to divestment. So here, we have remainders, so that word is still in there, and we have vested, so that word is still in there, but we've got this extra language, subject to divestment. And the subject to divestment should be, just from a linguistic standpoint, should be tipping you off that there's something here that might happen to this particular type of remainder. So let's look at the example. To A for life, then to B. But if B smokes a cigar during A's life, then to C. Okay, and so the interest we're dealing with here is B's interest. So leave C's interest to the side for a moment. Okay, the interest that B has follows. So first of all, we can point to B and say it's you, right? Who has the interest right after A's life estate? B has the interest right after A's life estate. So we can point to B and say, you are the one that holds this remainder. Okay, we don't have to guess. So at the moment of conveyance, you hold that remainder. And so long as nothing happens, B doesn't smoke any cigars during A's life, then B is ready to take. Okay, if nothing changes in the world, then B's interest is going to become possessory. Okay, B's remainder is going to become possessory. It has already vested. Okay, it has already vested. So if things just continue on and B doesn't smoke any cigars, then B is ready at the end of A's life estate to take it automatically. So that is the vested part of the vested remainder subject to divestment. So we can point to B and it's already vested. B has got it. Okay. But then the distinguishing characteristic of the vested remainder subject to divestment is that something might happen that will force B to forfeit their interest. In this example, that is smoking a cigar during A's life. Okay, so think about it this way. 2A for life creates a life estate. Then to B creates a vested remainder. But if B smokes a cigar during A's life, then to C is signaling to us that something might happen to that vested remainder. What might happen to the vested remainder is that it might be divested, right? So to the extent that that's a verb that makes any sense to you, to divest something is to cancel out or kill a vested property interest. Okay, so if someone is divested of their interest, it means they had an interest and now it's gone. Okay, so in this instance, it would be C who is divesting B of their vested remainder. Okay, so what makes this example a vested remainder subject to divestment is that there's something that might happen in the future. It hasn't happened yet. And if it doesn't happen, then B is going to take, but it might happen in the future that is going to force B's interest to be forfeited. Okay, and that characteristic makes B's interest subject to divestment. And so here you would look and you would say A has a life estate, B has a vested remainder subject to divestment. Okay, we can point to B, it's ready if nothing happens, but if something happens, it is forfeited, it's divested, it's gone. Okay. You may be wondering, what is C's interest here? Okay, I'm going to tell you what it is, and then we'll talk about why it's that sometime later, because it's just kind of something that you need to just know and accept what C's interest here is. C's interest is an executory interest. Okay, it is not an executory interest that we have seen on any chart thus far, even though the word is the same as the interest that we've seen so far. Okay, When you have a vested remainder subject to divestment, if you can identify the person who holds the ability to divest, that person has an executory interest. Okay, and we'll talk about that in a little more detail a little bit later. Okay, so what does C have? C has an executory interest. So I want you to just couple in your mind that a vested remainder subject to divestment is often attached to an executory interest. So couple those things in your notes and in your mind. Okay, questions on the vested remainder subject to divestment before I move forward? Okay, let's go to the next line. Also a vested remainder subject to something. This one I think is the most fun. I think it's conceptually kind of easier than the vested remainder subject to divestment. So the main difference, the main thing with a subject to open, and sometimes in the book or in supplements, you might see it referred to as subject to partial divestment. Okay, I think subject to open makes more sense descriptively. And the distinguishing characteristic here is that we cannot point to a single person who is going to take an interest, but we can point to a group of people, okay? A group of people that might expand or contract, that might change, okay? And so that is the distinguishing feature of the vested remainder subject to open. So the distinguishing feature of the vested remainder subject to divestment is this: it can be forfeited. The distinguishing feature here is that it is an unclosed group that holds the interest. Okay, so again, let's look at the example. To A for life, then to A's children. Okay, so let's assume that A has two children, X and Y. If they have X and Y to begin with, but A is still alive, which by definition A is, since it's a life estate. As long as A is alive, A can have more children. If A has more children, then the group that is A's children is growing. It's now, if A has a third child, Z, X, Y, and Z. So long as A is living, in this example, let's say A has two kids, X and Y. A has a life estate. X has a vested remainder subject to open, vested in the sense that X has got it, right? They are going to be A's child. They already are A's child. It is done, right? So they are A's children. They have a vested remainder, and Y is the exact same. But so they're ready. As soon as A dies, they will be A's children, and they will take. And though it can't be forfeited, if Z comes along into the world, then Z will take her share as A's child, right? As A's third child. And so what we know for sure is that X has something, it's vested, it's a remainder, and that it's going to come to them. But we don't know the size. How big of a stake is it going to be? Okay, so in our example that we're working from, X and Y go from having a 1/2 interest to a 1/3 interest if a third child is born. Okay, and so this is somewhat common. It is somewhat common because often classes of children or classes of grandchildren or whomever are individuals who are included in a group, right? They are, that is in a gift, right? So this kind of thing, to A for life, then to A's children, seems like perhaps the most common kind of life estate and remainder situation, okay? So vested remainders subject to open are very common. Mostly we're going to find indefeasibly vested remainders, but often we will see vested remainders subject to open because of these class gifts that exist to my children or to my grandchildren or to students in section 12 who pass the bar or whatever. Okay, so that is vested subject to open, the distinguishing characteristic that the gift is given to an unclosed class. Note the difference between if this had said to A for life, then to X and Y. Okay. To A for life, then to X and Y is a specific gift to an ascertainable person, X, Y. That's different, even though sort of functionally it starts out the same, to A for life, then to A's children. X and Y are A's children, so they have a vested interest. But since the group hasn't been closed, A's children could expand. Since it hasn't been closed, we do not have an indefeasibly vested remainder. We have a vested remainder that is still subject to change. And in this instance, subject to open, subject to altering based on the number of people or future people being entered into unclosed, into the class of people that receive the gift. In this instance, the class of A's children. Okay. Pausing again. Questions on vested remainder subject to open? Yeah, Davis.
So with the vested remainder subject to open, is it ever possible that by saying something to the effect of to A's children, that it could refer to like to his children at the time without specifically saying their name, or would it need to say to A's children at the time of writing, or something like that, more specific?
Yeah. So you need to be, it's always best to be specific, right?
Mhm.
If you say then to any children A has ever had, like that would be the best. Most of the time, this phrasing to A for life, then to A's children is going to be to children that A has before A dies. That's going to be what it is. But it could be then to A's children at the time of conveyance, in which case you would want to say then to A's children at the time of conveyance. Or as we talked about in one of the worksheets, one of the worksheet problems, you could be meaning to A for life, then to A's children who are still alive at the time of A's death. And then I think we use the phrasing then living, right? Then to A's children, then living. If it's then to A's children, then living, Davis, this is kind of a hard question. Do you think it's a vested remainder subject to open that they have? So if it had said to A for life, then to A's children, then living, or alive at the time of A's death.
I guess it's not then, because if it's contingent on like the time of conveyance, then there's like necessarily a limited number of people that could include. It's not open-ended. And it's almost like doing the conveyance backwards, it seems like a little bit, but
right. So
yeah.
It's uncertain, right? We don't know at the moment of conveyance who A's children who are alive at the end of A's life are going to be, right? Between now and then, we can have all sorts of different things happen. More children born, some children passing away, etc. Okay. And so if that's the conveyance to A for life, then to A's children, then living at the time of A's death, well, then we have a contingent remainder, which we've talked about a little bit. So is that answering your question? There is uncertainty in A's children, right? And we talked about this one with Annie in the practice problems. Generally speaking, this is going to be interpreted to any child of A, whether they're born after the conveyance, whether they're alive at the end of A's life. As long as there's a child of A, then they are in this group.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. David?
Yes. So I get that the class can grow to like X, Y, and Z or something. But say if Y dies, predeceases A, but Y has children, would the Y's vested remainder go to Y's children? So it'd be X, Y's children, and Z for,
Yes.
okay.
Yes. So, and going back to Davis's question, if it's interpreted or phrased a little bit differently, then that might not be the case.
Mhm.
But unless it is phrased differently, then David, what you've just described is exactly what would happen. It would pass, because it's vested, it can be inherited. So wise kids or any of wise heirs, if that's what it comes to, would end up taking the interest that Y would have had.
I was just getting a little hung up on the class aspect, but okay. I think I
Yeah.
get it.
And note that the class can shrink also, okay? So if it said to A for life, then to A's children who are living in Memphis, let's see, and there's a group of children that are living in Memphis, and then one of them leaves, then they leave the class, okay? So what can happen to the sticks in a vested remainder is that they can increase or decrease. We don't know the size of the class until the class gets closed, okay? Normally, we're talking about a growing class, so that's really the focus for us, but it is plausible to have a class that shrinks. Okay, we good? All right, so now let's talk about the fourth of the types of remainders. This is the contingent remainder. So this one we've talked about, we've alluded to a little bit, and it's the, it's kind of, in some ways, I think it's easier to see than the two vested remainders subject to, but it is harder to describe. And so I've got two examples over here for describing the contingent remainder. And they differ in that in one instance, we know who's going to get it. We just don't know if they're gonna. And in the other instance, we have an unascertainable recipient. We don't know who is going to fit the description in the conveyance. Okay, so let's do them one at a time. To A for life, then to A's oldest living child at the time of A's death. So Davis, this is kind of the question that I just asked you about the prior conveyance, if we change it up a little bit. To A for life, then to A's oldest living child at the time of A's death. Here, we just can't know that. When, let's say A has 9 children, and obviously one of them is oldest right now, but if we're going to tag the time that we determine who is oldest to the moment of A's death, and that is in the future, then by definition, up until that point, we can't ascertain who is going to take at the end of A's life. Okay, so this is an example of an unascertainable person. Okay, an unascertainable person. We don't know. There are 9 kids. One of them is going to be the oldest, presumably, and I suppose it's possible that none of them survive, in which case there would be a little reversion in there. Leave that to the side for now. We don't know which one it's going to be, so we can't say that any of them have a vested remainder. So you would say A has a life estate, and you would list the 9 kids, and you would say they all have a contingent remainder. And the contingent remainder is always on the same thing, contingent upon being the oldest living child of A at the time of A's death. That's what the contingency is. We don't know who it's going to be. It might be you, etc. Okay, so we can't know who it's going to be until some future time. Okay, and so this is so that's one type of contingent remainder. There's a different type of contingent remainder, and that's one where we actually know the person that we're talking about, but there's something that has to happen before they are ready to take, before their interest vests. So this second example is that. To A for life, then to B if B reaches the age of 21 during A's life. So presume that B is under 21. Okay, so here we can point to B and we can say, B, you're the one that's got this interest. But what we don't have is this, that the condition precedent, the condition that has to happen hasn't happened. Okay, Until it happens, B turns 21, then it hasn't happened. And until it happens, then it's not ready, the remainder is not ready to become possessory. Okay? Until it happens, it's not ready to become possessory. Therefore, it's not vested. Okay, vested is ready to become possessory right now. If the life estate ends, is ready. Here, in this example, it's not ready. It's contingent because even though we know it's B, this condition hasn't occurred. Therefore, it's not ready to become possessory. Therefore, it's contingent and not vested. Okay? So to A for life, A has a life estate, then to B if B reaches the age of 21 during A's life, B has a contingent remainder. Again, reversion is there in case B doesn't. Okay. So I want to play it out on this example for a second. To A for life, then to B if B reaches the age of 21 during A's life. That's the example we're working through. And I'm telling you already that A has a life estate and B has a contingent remainder in fee simple, so long as they're under 21. So let's move forward a little bit. And let's say that, so that's at the moment of conveyance. After conveyance, B, time progresses and B gets older each year. And eventually A is still alive and B turns 21. Okay. So the next question I'm going to ask is, once B turns 21, what interests are there in this property, or who holds what interests? So A is still alive, B has now reached the age of 21. Anybody want to take a stab? Hunter, you want to try that one?
So I think that if B reaches the age of 21, A still has the life estate, but then B would have an indefeasibly vested remainder
And why would it be indefeasibly vested?
because they've met the requirement.
They've met the requirement. So there's nothing that we have an ascertainable person, right? It's B. And is it ready to become possessory right now? As soon as A dies?
Yes.
Yes. So it has vested, right? So it has vested and it can't unvest. Hunter can be stopped being 21?
No.
No, right? We're not worrying with time travel. So there's certain things, just so you know, even though science might defeat property law at some point, you cannot have a child after your death. Okay, even though maybe you could, and you can't go back in time. All right, so those are things that we're just going to put off the table as science fiction that we're not going to let science fiction destroy property law yet. Okay, so Hunter's right. As soon as B turns 21, this stops being a contingent remainder and it becomes an indefeasibly vested remainder. Hunter, let me stick with you for a second and do another example. So let's say I have to A. Okay. So that's what we've got. So at the moment of conveyance, who has what?
Is this like it would like once A dies? Or,
Nope. At the moment of conveyance.
Then I would say that none of them have any.
We'll start at the beginning. First of all, what does A have?
A would have a life estate.
Good. That's the easy one. So now we have X, Y, Z, and Hunter. Are any of them 21?
No.
No. So do any of them have a vested remainder?
No.
No. So, but might they be in this group of A's children who reach the age of 21?
I mean, eventually, but at the time of conveyance, they're not. So
At the time of conveyance, they're not. So they don't have a vested remainder, but they do, like B in this example, have a contingent remainder, right? So something has to happen before it vests, before it's ready to take, but they have something, right? They have something. They have the possibility of being in this group, right? So we would say that X, Y, Z, and Hunter have contingent remainder in fee simple. Okay? Hopefully everybody's with that. So now let's say that a year passes and X turns 21. Now who has what interests? A is still alive.
I would say then that still has a life estate.
Right. And I just, before you continue, everybody note A still has a life estate. Don't stop saying it. If the question is who has what interests and A still has a life estate, then to keep telling me A has a life estate. Okay. So a lot of times on exams, I'll see students just skip to the changes in the remainders, the extent that there have been changes. Don't skip it, right? Remind me that A still has a life estate because they do. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, and then I would say then that X would have an indefeasibly vested remainder.
Okay, so that's what you said before, that it was an indefeasibly vested remainder in fee simple, right? So when we had B, you told me that when B turned 21, it would become an indefeasibly vested remainder. And I said that was absolutely. But now I'm giving you a different problem where it's not then to B if B reaches 21, it's then to any of A's children who reach 21. So is it indefeasibly vested? You're right that it's vested. Okay, X turns 21, boom, it vests.
Then would it be vested remainder subject to open?
Why?
Because the group of people that will eventually get the fee simple can continue to grow.
Can continue to grow as Y, Z, and eventually Hunter turn 21. They can jump into this class. Okay. So I won't ask you this, Hunter, because you would have no way of knowing. But Y, Z, and Hunter all have an interest still too. Okay. Their interest is no longer a remainder. They have an executory interest. There is something in between the life estate and these three individuals' interests. Okay, and what that is a vested remainder. And so here we have a life estate, a vested remainder subject to open, and executory interests in fee simple for Y, Z, and Hunter. They have future interests that can jump in and cut short or shrink X's interest, right? Okay, so Hunter, I'm going to ask you, continue just for a second. Based on what I just told you, now Y turns 21 also. So what do I need to change?
Then you'd have to add Y down there with X for the vested remainder subject to open in fee simple.
And get rid of Y from there.
Yes.
Okay. And so now if A dies, let's say A dies before Z and Hunter have turned 21, then what will the state of title be?
For Z and Hunter,
Just generally.
well, I think then the X and Y would have, I think it would be indefeasibly vested remainders at that point, because it's the class that they're in can no longer grow since A is dead.
Great. Class can't grow, so the class is closed, but A is dead, so who can go on the property? If you're telling me they have remainders, then that must mean that someone else has a life estate. So, but you also told me that A died, so someone doesn't.
Oh, I'm sorry. Then X and Y would have fee simple then, correct?
There you go. So everybody's seeing that. When A dies, X and Y will take fee simple 50% interest. That's called a concurrent interest. We're going to talk about it next week. Okay, with two people holding the same stick at the same time. Okay, so and Z and Hunter, what happens to their interests?
They no longer have an interest.
Gone, right? Poof. Austin?
Why is it that as soon as X and Y get the vested remainder subject to open, why does that turn the interests of Z and Hunter from contingent remainder to
Yeah.
executory interest?
Okay, so I don't think I'm going to have a satisfactory answer for you in terms of why this is so, but I'm going to try to describe it to you. Okay, so it's clear in that example that I've just typed up, to A for life, then to B, that B has a remainder that follows directly after A's life estate. Okay, I'm hoping that's clear to everybody at this point. Okay, that there's a time, there's a life estate, and then there is the end of the life estate and a remainder. And the two things are like consecutive to one another. Okay, but then to, what was it, A's kids who turned 21, right? And let's just say X is already 21, but Y, Z, and Hunter are not. Okay, so A still has a life estate. Hopefully, Austin, that's pretty clear. And I think you're probably, it sounds like from your question that you're cool with that this is for X a vested remainder subject to open in fee simple. Okay, so the question is, why isn't Y, Z, and Hunter's interests also remainders? And the answer is because their interests have something in between the life estate and their interests. Okay, so they aren't yet right behind the life estate. There's something that has to happen, something that exists, this vested remainder subject to open, that exists in between the life estate and whatever interest that X, Y, and Z have, that Y, Z, and Hunter have. Okay, and so their interest is not ready to be a remainder yet. Okay, something has to happen to get them back in line behind the life estate. They were all behind the life estate. Okay, there was nothing between when they were all contingent. But as soon as something vests, then there's something that exists. There's something physical there in between the life estate and the interests of X, Z, and Hunter. Okay, and so they aren't immediately following the life estate anymore. Okay, and so what they're doing is, let's say Y turns 21. As soon as that happens, then Y jumps in and shrinks X's interest, partially divests. Okay, it partially divests X's interests. And so then it becomes a vested remainder. When Y turns 21, it becomes a vested remainder subject to open. Okay, so the answer to your question is because they're not ready to take yet, and because there is a vested interest between here, Y, Z, and Hunter, and the life estate. So again, I confess that that's not really a satisfactory answer even to me, and I'm the one that gave it. But hopefully y'all can sort of see that that is, from a labeling standpoint, that's what it is. Okay, just like in the vested subject to divestment example, 2A for life, but if B smokes a cigar, then to C. C also is waiting to jump in and divest B's interest, right? So to the extent that C has something here, it's behind B's interest. It's not really behind the life estate yet. And so it's an executory interest that's attached to the vested remainder subject to divestment. Just like in this example, YZ and Hunter, they have to divest the X's interest first. That's their first thing that they're behind. Austin, is that helpful?
Yeah, so it's almost because they're like an extra degree removed from the possessory
Exactly.
interest.
That's well
Okay.
said, yes.
Okay, that makes sense.
Mhm. Yale?
My question is about vested remainder subject to divestment. Does C have the same restriction as B? So what if C smokes a cigar in A's life, does C get cut out or no? Unless it's
Not in this
specifically stated.
wording. Not in this wording.
Okay. That was my question. Thank you.
Mhm. You will see that I'm trying to be really diligent about making the condition only connected to during A's life. It's possible to write conveyances that have the condition go beyond, right? So let's do that one real quick. So let's say it's okay. So what I've excluded, what I had was that was in there, but now I've removed it. Okay. So it's gone. Okay. So let's walk through that one. A has a life estate. And I've already told y'all in this example, B has a vested remainder subject to divestment. And I've already told y'all that that C has an executory interest in fee simple. Okay. In the original version, I would have told you that it was in fee simple. Okay, but I'm going to delete that because we're going to walk through this. Let's say B doesn't smoke cigar and A dies. Okay. Does B have a fee simple? Do y'all think?
I would say
Dale,
no,
you would say no. Why?
because it's not absolute. They could still lose it if they smoke a cigar.
Exactly. So remember, we always we can like just say that, right? What does that look like? That doesn't look like a fee simple. That looks like what?
Would that be another life estate?
Where is the life?
I guess it's not a life estate.
Mhm.
It's a condition subsequent, right?
It is a condition subsequent, but what else is it?
With the remainder to C.
Mhm. Future interest to C. So what is our distinguishing characteristic? How do we determine which of these three it is? So you're right that the language kind of looks like this, but
Would it be the determinable because it's automatic? Like as soon as he smokes the cigar, it moves on?
now you're throwing darts. Can somebody help
Yes.
him?
Is it the executory limitation because it's a third party?
Yeah, it's just like this. 2A on condition that don't smoke cigar, but if you do smoke a cigar, then to B, it's this, right? So it is a vested remainder in subject to divestment in fee simple subject to an executory limitation. And so, Yale, you're right that B does not take a straight fee simple because it's still got the language of defeasance in there, right? Okay, and so I recognize that as soon as that happens, it starts to become really, really messy. That's why I try to be diligent about including the during A's life, okay? Because during A's life means this is just a fee simple, and we can all move on and have peace in the world. Okay, but if I forget this, then we've got to, then, you know, y'all just be aware. Does the condition stop at the time of the life estate ends, or does it survive, right? Does it survive into the world in which B takes possession? Okay, so Yale, let me ask you now, B smokes a cigar. What happens?
This is after A's already died.
A's dead. B
Okay.
smokes a cigar.
Then I guess C would then get a fee simple.
Beautiful. Okay. How are we feeling?
Feeling good.
Okay. How about others? Everybody feeling good?
No.
So I have some other examples to walk us through, and maybe some other graphics that might help, but I want to pause for questions. Maybe the other examples will trigger questions.
I have one question.
Okay.
So you said in the investor remainder subject to open. So you said in the whenever B's kids turn 21 or something like that. So you said if none of them turn 21 at the time of conveyance, then what happens to it? If none of them are 21 at the time?
At the time of A's death, at the end of the life estate,
Mm-hmm.
it seems like there would be a reversion, right? So there's a possibility that there are no kids. And so the grantor has retained some possible chance that they will get this property back if no one reaches 21.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see what we got. Other questions?
I have just like a vague question, but is it possible that you can be kind of right, or is it either you're all the way right or all the way wrong in these kind of situations?
So you're all the way right or all the way wrong. But in real life, sometimes there's ambiguity about the language, right? So I'm not going to give you ambiguous language about whether or not, you know, what is meaning, what is meant. Okay, so you're going to, if I want it to be determinable, I'm going to use so long as. If I want it to be, you know, so in real life, there's always the sort of gray space about if it's not using the magic words, then we might have that. On my exam, it's either all right or all wrong. That being said, you know, that's each component. So let's say we had one where, you know, A had a life estate, X had a vested remainder subject to open in fee simple, and Y had an executory interest in fee simple, right? And you got that A had a life estate, and you got that X had a vested remainder subject to open, and then you put that Y had a contingent remainder, okay? So you would get partial credit, right? You would get credit for the things that you got. So it's not multiple choice where if you put the wrong one, you just, as though you didn't do anything. Is that making sense? Okay. Yeah, Annie, sorry.
That's okay. I was so kind of going back to what Davis was talking about. So if it's oh wait, I think maybe I just realized this question doesn't make any sense. What I was gonna say was if it's to A for life and then to A's children, provided they're 21 at the time of A's death. I just realized that in this question I'm setting up, A still doesn't have the fee simple. I guess I was asking if the grantor with the fee simple is granting I guess it would be vested remainder subject to divestment or contingent remainder, and that condition isn't met at the time of the grantor's death, but the grantee was the children. So, it would be like a reversion, but when it reverts, would it just go back to the children? Like, because they're like per stirpes because of the heirs, even though they were as a function
Yeah.
of the will.
You've lost me. So I'm not following why it would go back to the grantor's kids.
I guess because sorry, I'm really having a hard time.
So let's start it with a type of conveyance. So let's walk it through. Let's walk it through on the screen. So what is the conveyance that you're imagining?
So if A has the fee simple,
Okay.
I think this question might not make sense. I'm realizing that, but yeah. So if A has the fee simple and says to my children on the condition that at the time of my death they've reached 21 or something like that,
Okay.
and then that condition isn't met.
Hold on, slow down. So I want you to note that you haven't created a remainder at all. To my children on the condition that they are 21 at the time of my death, and I'm still alive,
Mhm.
right? So what A has done is kept the current interest for themselves
Mhm.
and given away the future interest. So I suppose you could say that A has given themselves a life estate, and the kids would have a contingent remainder in fee simple, contingent on being 21. So can I just change it a little bit?
Yeah.
Just so, because I think that phrasing is a little misleading. Okay, I think that creates the same thing for you.
Mhm.
Okay. And so you're saying what happens if none of them reach
Mhm.
21?
Yeah.
Right? So that possibility exists.
Mhm.
And so until one of them reaches 21, then O keeps a reversion. And so if this happened in, let's say, O's will, is this helping?
Yeah. Thanks. I get it. I realized where I was thinking about it wrong. I was like, in my head, I was setting up a situation where A was the grantor of the life estate.
Right.
And okay, got it.
That would be very unusual to grant yourself a life estate. Much more often, what you're going to have is a will, in which you keep it and fee simple until you die, and then you give it to your kids who reach 21. But if it's in a will, then we don't have that same issue as if there's some other grantor who gives it. So let's say it's two spouses and they give it to their surviving spouse for life, then to the surviving spouse's kids who reach 21. So that's I think more in line with what you're asking about. So then what happens if none of the kids reach 21? This is in fact, just what you just described is in fact what happened in the Baker versus Whedon case, right? It was to Anna for life, then to Anna's children. But remember, it wasn't that they had to reach 21, they just had to have them.
Mhm.
And so it reverted back to his grandkids, if you recall, in that example. So it's not exactly the same, but it's similar.
Thanks.
Okay.
So in that example, if A dies, so then if the kid and none of the kids were 21. So none of the kids reached 21 during A's life.
Mm-hmm.
And A doesn't have a life estate anymore because she died.
Right.
So then would that go to the state? Then what? Because the heirs are, I guess they would go to O's heirs.
Right.
Or,
And O's heirs might be A's heirs, right? We don't know the relationship between O and A, but it's plausible if it's two spouses that O's heirs are A's heirs. But it's also plausible that they aren't, right? It could just be that O and A are good friends or something like that. So without more facts, Chase, you can't say for sure who is going to take it. So for our purposes, we can say that O's estate will take fee simple. So then you might need facts like, does O have any heirs? Or does O have a will? If not, and then we would get to the possibility of it escheating to the state. Okay.
Say that the details included that O and A were married and their heirs are the same.
Mhm.
Because none of them reached 21, would which one would hold the weight? Would it be like, oh, well, because they're heirs, they still get it? Or
Good
is
question.
it, oh, well, none
All
of them
right,
reached?
So I'm gonna give us those facts so that everybody can follow along. So spouse 1 to spouse 2. This is at spouse 1's death, right? Okay. Right? So what you're asking is, and let's just say that the kids of spouse 2 are also the kids of spouse 1, right? That they're the kids that they have together. Because it's plausible that that's not the case, but let's just do that. Okay? So spouse 2 dies, but none of their kids have reached 21. The answer is the same. It's spouse 1's estate is going to take fee simple, but what you're saying is, but spouse 1's heirs are the same kids, right? Right, Chase?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, doesn't matter. Okay, they get it as the heirs of spouse 1, even though they didn't reach 21. So the problem would be that in the will, if spouse 1 does not distribute out the residue of the estate, right? They don't say, okay, this property goes to spouse 2 for life, then to spouse 2's children who reach 21, blah, 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 blah. And everything else goes to St. Jude charity. Then if they don't account for that, everything else, the residue of the estate, then it's still going to pass through their intestate succession to their heirs, to the kids. So if they don't want that to happen, they can avoid it, right? So if it said to the house to spouse 2, blah, 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 everything else to St. Jude. Okay. If that's the instance, then we would actually say that St. Jude would take it in fee simple. You see why?
Mhm.
Because there we've identified what happens to spouse 1's estate. It goes to St. Jude. Does that work?
Yes, it does. Because it's like you're looking at their main interest, like the will, the person who wrote the wills, like what they were trying to do.
Yes. Intent of the grantor.
Intent. Okay. Thank you.
Welcome. Other questions? Okay. Oh, yep. Tommy?
What are the situations again when somebody's interest or remainder rather, turns into an executory interest? Is that just contingent remainders?
It's usually contingent remainders that become vested subject to divestment, or
Okay.
or that are whenever I worked on these graphics for this, so let me see if they will help. Let me see if we got one. Okay, let's look at this one. Okay. To Marge for life, then to Bart. But if Bart writes on the chalkboard during Marge's life, then to Lisa. Okay. So I think, Tommy, though, you were asking about when it becomes executory. So do you first see why in the original that Lisa has an executory interest?
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Okay. So, so everybody else, the green line is the present interest, the red line are the future interests, and the stuff in black is whatever is facts that happen. Okay. So it starts out like this. And then if he writes on the chalkboard, then he loses his and she gets an indefeasibly vested remainder, and his is gone. Okay. Let me see if any of these other. They're not. Okay. So your question is, you're looking for examples when a contingent remainder or something becomes an executory interest. Is that right?
Yeah, just whenever an executory interest is not originally in the problem, but somehow shows up in the problem later down the
Great.
road.
Okay. Let's see. Then to okay. Okay. So everybody following this so far? Tommy, you good with it?
Yep.
All right. So in the original conveyance, we have a life estate and a bunch of contingent remainders. And I should add into this, just to make it a little cleaner, that. Okay. So that's what we start with. Then let's say, Tommy, you are just raring to go at law school and you decide you are going to graduate a semester early. So you graduate a semester before everyone else in the group. Okay. So Tommy graduates first. Okay. But it's still alive. So A has a life estate. So Tommy, what do you have?
I think I have a vested remainder subject to open.
Yep. Okay. So hopefully everybody sees that, because the rest of you will graduate when you graduate. Okay. And then you'll jump into the class, and then that whole group will then be together. Okay. Until it closes. And once all of you have graduated, then it will be indefeasibly vested, because there'll be nobody else to jump into the group. Okay. But everyone else in that example has the executory interest. Okay. So when you jump into the group and vest yourself, Tommy, you create a situation which everyone else's contingent remainders, so yours became a vested remainder subject to open. Theirs moved in the opposite direction, away from being a remainder at all to being an executory interest. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's sort of like once that contingent remainder gets activated in any sort of way, it changes the situation for everybody.
That's exactly right. When you have a contingent remainder, you might have infinity other contingent remainders. But as soon as you have a vested remainder, you will not have any more contingent remainders. Okay, as soon as one has been vested, then anything else cannot be a contingent remainder. Okay, so rule of thumb, if you identify a vested remainder anywhere in your future interests, you will do not put contingent remainders. Okay, they are something else. Usually they're executory interests, like in this example. Okay, the opposite, if you have some contingent remainders, you are not going to have any vested remainders. Okay, so you will not have a class of interest that has contingent remainders and vested remainders sort of simultaneously existing. Here we started with a bunch of contingent remainders and everyone had a contingent remainder. Then Tommy vested his and everyone else's stopped being contingent remainders and started being something different. Okay? We good? We'll stop here. We'll pick back up on Wednesday with these and some other stuff. Okay? See ya Wednesday. Have a good one.